Imagine standing in a sterile, windowless room, staring at a control panel with a row of gray switches. In the next room sits a pleasant stranger you met just 10 minutes ago, strapped into a chair with electrodes taped to their skin. A man in a crisp white lab coat stands over your shoulder, his face completely expressionless. He tells you to flip the first switch, sending 15 volts of electricity into the stranger's body. The stranger winces. The man in the lab coat tells you to flip the next one, then the next, pushing the voltage higher and higher. You can hear the stranger screaming, begging you to stop, slamming their fists against the wall. The lab coat gives you a cold, direct order. Please continue. If you are like most people watching this, you are completely certain you would refuse. You believe your moral compass is fixed, deeply rooted, and unshakable. You look at the darkest chapters of human history, the executioners, the guards, the betrayers, and you assume they belong to a completely different species of human, monsters born with a missing soul. But psychology reveals a terrifying glitch in our programming. Your morality is not a solid rock inside your chest. It is a fluid, fragile response to whoever happens to be holding the microphone. Under the right conditions, the line between a saint and a monster doesn't just blur, it completely vanishes. We like to think our values protect us from committing atrocities. But what if your brain is actually wired to rewrite your morals the exact second a person in authority tells you to? In 1961, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram wanted to understand how ordinary, decent citizens could participate in the horrors of the Holocaust. He set up the exact experiment I just described at Yale University. He recruited everyday people, teachers, mailmen, engineers, and salesmen. Before the study, Milgram asked a room full of elite psychiatrists how many people would actually go all the way to the maximum lethal dose of 450 volts. The experts predicted less than 1%. They assumed only severe psychopaths would do it. The actual results shattered our understanding of human nature. Every single participant flipped the switches up to 300 volts, even as the actor in the other room screamed about a heart condition. And a staggering 65% of ordinary good people went all the way to the very end. They flipped the final switch labeled Danger Severe Shock. They didn't do it because they were sadistic. Many were shaking, stuttering, and biting their lips in pure agony. They did it simply because a man in a lab coat calmly said, "The experiment requires that you continue." This is where the illusion of your independence begins to unravel. Milgram's study revealed that humans possess a psychological emergency switch called the agentic state. When you enter this state, you no longer view yourself as an independent person responsible for your own actions. Instead, you view yourself merely as an instrument executing someone else's will. Your conscience doesn't shut down. It just hands the steering wheel to the nearest authority figure. But it gets worse. Once your brain abdicates responsibility, it activates a defense mechanism known as cognitive dissonance. Your brain cannot handle the agonizing pain of believing you are a good person while simultaneously watching your hands hurt a stranger. To survive the mental torment, your mind does something truly devious. It changes your beliefs to match your actions. You stop blaming the authority figure and you start blaming the victim. You tell yourself the person in the chair must have done something to deserve it. You convince yourself that compliance is the highest form of virtue. Stop. Look at your own life for a fraction of a second. Think of the petty cruelties you tolerate every day just because it's company policy, or the way things are. The descent into evil is never a sudden leap off a cliff. It is a series of tiny, logically paved steps downward. In another famous study, the Stanford Prison Experiment, Healthy, normal college students were randomly assigned to play the roles of guards and prisoners in a simulated basement jail. Within days, the guards began psychologically torturing the prisoners. They stripped them naked, forced them to clean toilets with their bare hands, and placed them in solitary confinement. There were no orders from a lab coat this time. The uniform itself became the authority. The role took over the human. The students didn't lose their morality. Their morality simply adjusted to fit the costume they were wearing. We are chameleons of cruelty. When you blend into a group, your individual identity experiences a phenomenon called de-individuation. In a crowd, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that calculates consequences and holds your personal values, physically lowers its activity. Your sense of self dissolves into the pack. You cease to be a person, and you become a cell in a much larger, much more dangerous organism. This isn't an academic lecture about history, and it isn't a story about people in a psychology lab 60 years ago. This is about you. Right now, you are wearing a dozen different invisible uniforms. You are a student, an employee, a citizen, a member of a political party, a face in a digital crowd. Every single day, you are handed scripts by algorithms, bosses, and societal expectations. And every day, your brain is actively looking for a lab coat to tell it what to do, just to save the immense biological energy required to think for yourself. You judge the historical villains because it makes you feel safe in your own skin. It is comforting to believe that evil is a rare, malignant disease carried by a few broken people. But the science is cold, clear, and uncompromising. Evil is not a localized disease. It is a factory setting. It is an evolutionary default built directly into the architecture of the human brain. If you were placed in that windowless room tomorrow, surrounded by a crowd of your peers, under the gaze of an authority figure you deeply respect, at what exact voltage would you finally find the strength to say no? Would it be at 150 volts when the screams begin? Would it be at 300 volts when the screaming suddenly stops and turns into dead silence? Or would you keep flipping the switches, quietly trusting the person in charge, desperately hoping that someone else will eventually step in and stop you from becoming the monster you always promised yourself you weren't?